So, you hear that quote? Cecil B. DeMille warriors. What in the world does that even mean? Well, it means that on the battlefields of World War II, a secret war of illusion was being waged. And it was waged by a unit that was, well, unlike anything in military history. Let's dive into this bizarre, brilliant story of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, better known by a much, much cooler nickname, the Ghost Army.
All right, so here's what we're going to cover. We're going to look at who these guys were, the strange arsenal they used, the artists who made up their ranks, their most daring deceptions, and, this is the big one, why their story was kept secret for 50 years.
Okay, so, Ghosts of the Battlefield. You gotta understand this wasn't just some cool-sounding nickname they came up with. Their whole mission was to literally be phantoms. We're talking about creating illusions on a scale so massive that they could fool the entire German army. Think about that. Their job was to trick the enemy into shooting at empty fields, to make whole panzer divisions chase shadows, all so that real Allied troops could be saved. We're talking thousands and thousands of lives.
So, you might be wondering, how does an idea this out there even get started? Especially in the super rigid, by-the-book world of the U.S. Army. Well, it all began with this totally unlikely pair working together in London. A real classic odd couple, brought together by the war.
So on one hand, you've got this guy, Ralph Ingersoll. Total character. He was a flamboyant, best-selling author, a journalist. One of his fellow officers even called him a bright guy who was such a goddamned liar. So yeah, he was the big idea man, the showman, inspired by some British tricks he saw in North Africa. And then on the other hand, you have Colonel Billy Harris. Complete opposite. A straight-arrow West Point grad from a long line of military men. He was the how do we actually make this crazy thing work guy. He had to figure out how to turn Ingersoll's wild theatrical ideas into a real functioning army unit.
And somehow, this odd couple, they actually pulled it off. They created the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. The mission? Tactical deception. Their weapons? Not guns and bombs. Not really. We're talking imagination, artistry, and technology. Their job was to fight a war inside the enemy's head.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. How did they actually do it? How did they pull off these massive illusions? Well, they basically had a three-part system. You can think of it like they were putting on a huge multimedia show for a very, very specific audience, the German army. Seriously, it was just like a stage play. You had the visual guys creating the sets, we'll get to that. You had sound engineers providing this dramatic and incredibly loud musical score. And you had radio operators who were basically actors performing from a script. But their main props, the stars of the show, hundreds and hundreds of inflatable rubber decoys. And this right here, this just perfectly shows how genius the whole thing was. An entire M4 Sherman tank that weighed only 93 pounds. 93 pounds. From a reconnaissance plane flying overhead, you could not tell the difference. And get this, it only took 4 guys to pick up a tank and move it into place. Imagine that. You could make an entire armored division pop up like overnight.
So look at the difference here. A real armored division has, 15,000 troops? The Ghost Army could fake that with just about 1,100 guys. And it wasn't just the rubber dummies. They backed it all up with sound. One of the veterans said they had the biggest boombox you ever saw, and they would blast these pre-recorded soundscapes of, say, a pontoon bridge being built. They even included the sounds of sergeants yelling and cursing at their men to make it sound real. And you could hear this stuff from 15 miles away. 15 miles! Absolutely incredible. So who were these guys? Who were the soldiers tasked with fighting a war of make-believe? Well, the unit basically became this magnet for creative types. They were deliberately recruited from the best art schools, from ad agencies, from design firms all over the country. And it was part of this bigger, really fascinating shift during the war. This realization that winning wasn't just about brute force. It was about outthinking the enemy. And to do that, you needed talent that you just wouldn't normally find on a battlefield.
I mean, just listen to that quote. Nothing kept us away from doing a watercolor. That says it all. The ranks were filled with guys like a young Bill Blass. Yeah, the Bill Blass, the future fashion icon. The story goes he used to read copies of Vogue in his foxhole. And get this, he even supposedly retailored his own uniform because he thought the standard issue fit was just sloppy in the middle of a war. So yeah, these were not your typical soldiers. This unit actually had one of the highest average IQs in the entire army. You've got future famous painters, photographers, designers, all of them trading their nice clean studios for the mud of Europe. And what's just wild is that in their downtime, between missions, they'd hang up their canvases on clotheslines and hold art shows for each other, right there in the middle of a war zone. But
For decades after the war, that creativity was also a huge source of doubt for them. A lot of these veterans were haunted by this quiet, nagging question. Did we actually make a difference? Did all their clever performances, their rubber tanks, their sound effects, did their art really matter in the brutal reality of World War II?
Well, we now know the answer, thanks to declassified records. And the answer is a resounding, emphatic yes. From the hedgerows of Normandy all the way to the Rhine River, the Ghost Army staged over 20 major deceptions. And they were often doing this just a few hundred yards from the front lines, creating entire phantom armies right under the enemy's nose.
And their masterpiece, their grand finale, was a mission called Operation Viersen. It's March 1945. The Allies are pushing into Germany. The U.S. Ninth Army has to get across the Rhine River. It's the last big natural barrier. The Ghost Army's job? To be the world's greatest distraction. They had to convince the Germans that this huge crossing was going to happen 10 miles south of where it was actually planned.
So for this final act, they went big. They created the illusion of a 40,000-man force. That's 2 full U.S. Army divisions, all looking like they were getting ready for a massive attack. They wanted the Germans to see an absolutely overwhelming force. But what was really there? Just 1,100 men. That's it. An army of 1,100 commanding an army of ghosts. They had 600 inflatable vehicles, they had fake radio chatter clogging up the airwaves with bogus orders, and they had the sounds of construction blasting from speakers in the woods, 24/7.
So, did it work? Oh, you better believe it worked. It was a complete stunning success. German intelligence bought the whole thing, hook, line, and sinker. They moved their troops, their artillery, everything to stop this phantom invasion. And that left the real crossing point wide open, just as planned. The actual Ninth Army got across the Rhine with almost no resistance. The number of casualties was incredibly low.
Just let that sink in for a second. The official, declassified U.S. Army report estimates their work saved between 15 and 30,000 American lives. By turning art into a weapon, this little unit of creatives is credited with saving tens of thousands of people. And yet, for decades, nobody knew. Nobody knew their story. So the war ends, right? You think it's time for parades and telling stories? Not for these guys. The Ghost Army veterans were all gathered together and basically told, you will never speak of this. Their mission, their methods, their very existence, all of it was stamped top secret. And why? Why the secrecy? Well, it was a pretty cold, practical reason. The Army wanted to keep these tactics up its sleeve, just in case they needed them again during the Cold War with the Soviets. But for the soldiers themselves, this meant a lifetime of silence. They couldn't tell their wives, their kids, their friends. They couldn't even really talk about it with each other. A lot of these men died without ever getting any credit for what they did. So finally, the story gets declassified in 1996. But even then, it took another huge fight to get these men the recognition they deserved. We're talking a 7-year lobbying campaign, led by a filmmaker named Rick Beyer and the veterans' families. They had to go door to door to more than 500 congressional offices. They even held an ice cream social on Capitol Hill just trying to get anyone to pay attention. And finally, in March of 2024, it happened. The unit was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the highest honors this country can give. And at that ceremony, in the U.S. Capitol, 3 surviving veterans, all of them over 100 years old, were there. They were there to see their unit and their long-kept secret finally get the honor it deserved. And there was this one moment from the ceremony that just says it all. You had the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of the Army. I mean, the 2 top leaders of the entire U.S. military, and they knelt down on the floor, right there on the ground, so they could speak face-to-face with these veterans. It was this incredibly powerful, quiet moment of respect, from one generation of soldiers to another. You know, the story of the Ghost Army really proves that sometimes the most powerful weapons aren't made of steel at all. They're made of creativity, of audacity, of deception. Their story was buried for 50 years, and it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other incredible stories, what other ghosts are still hidden away in the pages of our own history, just waiting for someone to find them?